All right, everyone. Hello, welcome back to the comprehensive yet informal study of the Critique of Pure Reason by Kant, Immanuel Kant. We are on the transcendental deduction section, and I've already explained that a few times, so I'll spare. If you're this far, you've probably seen a lot of it already, so I'll spare you a lot of the greater context, especially now that we're getting more into the details of apperception, which is really what we've been exploring as kind of the fundamental unity that we've been looking for in terms of uh,
Yep.
just
If you're joining
experience.
us just now, if you're joining us just now, don't.
Yeah, yeah, good. Honestly, I should probably do that instead of doing like a, not that I go on for actually 5 minutes, but a multiple minute introduction of every time. Definitely go back and look. It shouldn't be too hard to follow considering the depth we go into, and this is a comprehensive study for a reason. So despite it being informal, it still is very comprehensive. So everything you need should be in there. Let us know in the comments if you're lost on something. But just a quick little context setter. We are studying apperception as it relates to the foundation of experience, uh, and it is a unity. It's a unity of apperception, and we went into that a lot last session, and so we're coming to this section uh, describing it as the principle. Synthetic unity. It is the supreme principle, right? That's the term I was looking for just now. It is the supreme principle of use of all understanding. Um, and related to this, actually, last time Kant made an interesting claim in this footnote, making what we think is some sort of identity statement, saying that the synthetic unity of perception is in fact the faculty of understanding itself. So I'm wondering if we can get some extra context or elaboration or anything that could help us in terms of understanding that, because that was a little uh, weird, and we had to do some speculation with regards to what that really means. Um, but yeah, that's kind of where we are in the deduction. So that's my little context. Hopefully, it wasn't too long and too distracting. And unless Patrick has anything to say, we can get going.
Yeah, well, the additional note is you will see however many sections this is going to be. The sections after this one are very short for a
They
long
are.
time.
Yes.
So we'll see how far we go.
Yeah.
Um,
I might just
you
like.
already know, viewer.
Yeah, I might just cap them off, like in terms of like recording each thing as its own thing, just because the titles can be quite long. So if I combine them into a video, the title's gonna be like capping out the
Ah,
YouTube like
okay.
title text
Understood.
limit. So
Well, regardless, in that case, you can expect the next few to be very short.
but yes, yes. Unless they have short titles and they're very related in content, then I'll probably combine them. But for something like this, I think I'm gonna end the recording and go on to the next recording for it. But we'll play it by uh, how it actually goes when we do it. But yeah, generally expect some shorter sections is the takeaway. Um, cool. All right. Do you want us to get us going with this paragraph?
Sure. The supreme principle of the possibility of all intuition in relation to sensibility, which there couldn't be any other intuition, so I don't know why he added that.
Yeah, this seems already kind of like Kant. What are you doing? But I guess let him cook. I guess let him cook.
According to the transcendental aesthetic, uh, that all the manifold of sensibility stand under the formal conditions of space and time. The supreme principle of all relation, of all intuition in relation to the understanding, oh, okay, is that the manifold of intuition stand under conditions of the original synthetic unity of apperception. Okay, so it wasn't redundant, but that's a little odd, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of saying that like intuition obeys the understanding, which doesn't really like unless I'm misinterpreting that. But there's a footnote. Maybe we should read that before.
I think I see. It's the statement that all intuition stands under the conditions of space and time. And also, regarding under the understanding, all intuition stands under the condition of the original synthetic unity of our perception. So it's like just as
Oh,
all
like not as
might be,
things in themselves, but like as representations.
but like yes, as
Okay.
representations to us. So basically, he's saying just like for like any sensibility, any intuition to happen to us, it has to stand under the formal conditions of space and time. Just like that, it has to stand under the condition of apperception. The former of that is like the relationship of intuition, the necessary relation of all intuition, or that's what he's calling supreme principle, I guess, um, is to space and time with regard to sensibility, and with regard to the understanding, it's apperception.
No,
I don't
so
know
so
if
he's
that
drawing
makes
an
sense.
analogy, basically.
I think Kant might have actually been clearer in what he said than the way I phrased it that time. But
Yeah,
regardless,
rare Patrick being more complex than Kant moment.
regardless, I
But it's
think it's
so
I
it's more of
find
an
it clear what
analogy.
I find it clear what he's saying now that I see the whole.
Okay.
Um,
So just so I'm clear
so
on it, it's like an analogy basically. He's like bringing up this as an
I think so.
example to okay.
Yeah,
All right. That
yeah.
makes sense
So
then. Okay.
so
I just wanted to make sure
basically
I
he's
had that.
saying, yeah, basically he's just well, the analogy. I'm not sure if it's strictly an analogy because supreme principle, right? They're
Yeah.
both. I guess it is an analogy, but it's a very literal one,
Hmm.
right? They're both the supreme principle. Supreme principle, I take it to mean basically
Like foundational
yeah, everything has to like this has to apply to everything,
yeah.
right?
In
So
our
the one,
experience. Yeah.
yes, the one truth which has to apply to, or the two truths that have to apply to everything regarding sensibility um, in relation to intuition is that all the intuitions stand under the formal conditions of space and time, and then the thing that has to be true about intuition regarding the understanding is that all intuitions have to stand under the synthetic unity of apperception.
Hmm. Cool. Makes sense to me. Should we read this footnote?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Space and time and all their parts are intuitions, yeah. Thus, individual representations, along with the manifold that they contain in themselves, see the transcendental aesthetic. Yeah, okay. Thus, they are not mere concepts. Yeah, I got
Yeah.
that. By means of which the same consciousness is contained in many representations, but rather are many representations that are contained in one and the consciousness of it. Okay, yeah, got that. Thus, they are always found to be composite. Okay, interesting. And consequently, the unity of consciousness, I assume, is
Yes.
synthetic and yet as original is to be found in them. The singularity of theirs is important in its application. So he's basically saying that intuitions are in no way unified because unity itself is a category. So
Yes. Like not they're not unified in themselves. They get unified.
they're not plural either because they're preconceptual, right?
Um could you elaborate on that?
Right. So originally, when I thought, okay, they're not unified, so there's some kind of indeterminate plurality.
Yeah.
But then I realized that this is wrong because plurality too is a concept, right? It's something he talked about
So
as
it's
one of
just
the
pure
postulates.
indeterminacy, basically.
Right. It's pure. It's a pure indeterminacy. It's neither singular nor plural.
Hmm. Cool.
And unity, singularity, has to come before plurality. So they have
Yes.
to be originally united, namely in a single experience, before they can be either singular or plural. So that's really weird to think about
Yeah.
because it would seem like there's an excluded middle, right? If something is either it's singular or
Yeah.
plural. But
But
he's
really
saying no. He's denying this because he's saying that there's an indeterminacy which is preconceptual.
yes. So it's not really an excluded middle, it's more just like a different thing altogether.
Yeah, I guess it's not an excluded middle. It's what we would imagine to be a dichotomy is a false dichotomy.
Yes, exactly. Which I mean it becomes a dichotomy once concepts come into the picture.
That's true. It is a true dichotomy for concepts, and yet it is
But
not
we're
a true
talking about the
dichotomy.
preconceptual stage.
Right, which just messes with your head, doesn't it?
I guess if you tried to imagine it really hard, yes, that could get kind of trippy.
Well, the problem is we have to use some kind of words to describe what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, but I guess
But all
indeterminacy
of
is
them are going to
like,
be inaccurate.
yeah, I guess I'm just used to like, I don't know, Hegel's got me used to like indeterminacy, so I'm just like, okay, sure. You know, like I don't. I guess
Yeah,
I
I
guess
suppose.
I guess I don't try to think about it too hard anymore. I just see the word and I'm like, okay.
Right. Okay, well, anyway, let's back up to the actual paragraph.
This is annoying.
All the manifold representations of intuitions stand under the first principle insofar as they are given to us, yeah? And under the second, insofar as they must be capable of being combined in one consciousness, yeah, of course. For without that, nothing could be thought or cognized through them. And since given representations would not have in common the act of apperception, I think, and thereby would not be grasped together in self-consciousness.
So without the
So a
I
lot of
think they stay in that indeterminate stage.
yeah, a lot of redundancy there. We did talk about that.
Okay, I just
All
want to
right,
make sure
want
that
to keep
was
going?
correct and I wasn't like missing
Yeah,
anything. Okay.
definitely redundancy. The part that wasn't redundant was that analogy. The supreme principle for of
Oh,
intuition and
the beginning. Okay.
sensibility. Yeah, the beginning didn't seem redundant to me, although
It's very
it's
clear and like
it's a
implied.
it's a corollary. It's a
Yeah.
corollary.
Yeah.
That's the term I've been using. Spinoza's language I get from Spinoza, right?
Based. Yeah.
It follows, right?
Mhm.
If you think about it, it's not a controversial thing. It follows from what's
Mhm.
already been said, but maybe it's not obvious.
Yeah, it may be helpful to point it out. So thanks,
Yes.
Kant, for that first paragraph or the first section of that paragraph because this is one paragraph. Cool. All right, I can read the next one. Understanding is, generally speaking, the faculty of cognitions. Yep. These consist in the determinate relation of given representations to an object. An object, however, is that in the concept of which the manifold of a given intuition is united. Now, however, all unification of representations requires unity of consciousness in the synthesis of them. Consequently, the unity of consciousness is that which alone constitutes the relation of representations to an object. Thus, their objective validity, and consequently, is that which makes them into cognitions and on which even the possibility of the understanding rests. So, this actually is
Um,
pretty interesting, I think, to talk about.
to me, the most interesting thing is he seems to have provided a definition for object.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to touch on first. Like, because this whole, the whole, if you remember, before the actual deduction, we had this like transition to the deduction and the transition to the transition of the before that. So and in those sections, a big theme, if I'm remembering correctly, was kind of like we were talking about Hume, and we're like, okay, how do we apply these like subjective conditions onto the objective like experience of the world? Um,
Right.
and here we have this tie that is so essential, kind of like written in an anticlimactic way, and maybe we'll get like more on it, more attention on it, but it kind of just drops it there, which is definitely
Yeah, he does give it sort of as a matter of course, right?
yes, which
And
is funny because he
of
spent so much
course,
time building it up. Like he's like,
right,
okay,
of course,
the
an object is the concept that in the concept of
yeah,
which the manifold of good and intuition is united,
yeah,
which that didn't
we're
necessarily seem obvious to me.
no, and it didn't even seem obvious to him. He's like, okay, this is a big problem, guys. For like 3 sections, he was redundantly saying, "This is a big problem, guys, and we need to figure it out because Hume made this big problem." And there's a fork. I mean, this is obviously the language he was using, but you know, we analyzed it to basically mean this. You know, there's this fork, and we need to fix it, and it has to do with tying you know, subjective categories of the understanding onto objectivity. It's big, it's not obvious, and then lo and behold, actually, it is obvious. Get pranked, guys. Oh dear, readers of Critique of Pure Reason.
Well, yeah, it is. It's pretty obvious when you define the object that way,
Yeah.
but he treats the like definition like the definition here is obvious. But what he's saying here is that an object is nothing in itself. It doesn't present ourselves
Yes.
essentially, which we, to be fair, we have talked about this, but that's because we knew Kant, and
Well,
you have to
no.
know Kant.
To be fair, this was also I don't know if it was directly stated, but in the discussion of combination, this is brought up directly, I think, earlier.
I'm not sure if we could have. I feel like that was in the way we explained the concept of combination,
Okay,
though.
yes, you're probably right. Yeah, I guess this is the first time he's directly saying it himself and not
Right.
us.
What he's saying here is that like there isn't an object, right?
Yes.
But rather well, it's not like the object is given to us, right?
No, it's united by
No
us.
object is given to us. It's united by us. A manifold is given to us.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the one linguistic sort of problem is that um, if you look at if you analyze right, the manifold is united by us. What
Mm-hmm.
is the object of that sentence?
The manifold.
The manifold, right? So like the manifold has to, in a certain sense, be predicable. So it is a little bit questionable to me whether we can say that the manifold is not an object.
Well, that's what he's gonna touch on, I think, when we get to Numenon.
But like it appears for, but the manifold isn't a noumenon.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's the appearance, right? So noumenon is the in itself, but the
Yeah.
manifold is what appears to us in experience.
Oh,
The manifold comes from, is derived from the noumenon
yes.
according to Kant.
That's what I was
Although
getting at.
it's highly questionable how he knows that.
Right, which is also what I
Too.
was gonna say next, but I guess I'm getting a little
But
lost in
the
the
problem here, though,
terminology.
regardless, the manifold isn't noumenon. The manifold itself is not noumenon. The manifold is phenomenon.
Okay, wait. So with that understanding, can you repeat the problem?
Well, the problem is that the manifold is appearance for us. So how is that not already an object in like the ordinary sense of the word object,
I guess it is in the
right?
ordinary sense, but not in the Kantian sense that was just dropped as if it's like common knowledge.
Um,
Because that would just
I'm
be
not
self-referential,
sure.
but it's not. He's drawing.
But I'm not sure. The problem is I'm not sure, given the way he's used object throughout the book, that it is consistent with the definition of object
No,
he's
it
giving.
definitely. I would almost like bet like you money that it is not. However, do we really want to depend on like critique of pure reason Kant to like be consistent with his words?
Well, it's a problem though, right? Because
Sure, I'll admit that it's a problem for the book and reading
like
it, but to
no, but
making
I want to like hash this out. I want to have you give me a second to hash out what I'm saying
okay,
here.
okay.
Basically, the problem we're being presented with is how could our subjective categories apply to objects, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can they be objective?
Mm-hmm.
And his answer comes in the fact that objects are not given to us, but rather united.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me like maybe does that just shift the problem, right? Because
Well, that's where I think it shifts it to Numenon
no, but
and
it
phenomenon.
shifts the problem from like okay, not the question of how does it apply to objects, but how does it apply to the manifold? Because we've defined the manifold as not an object, but now there's this new problem of how exactly does um, how exactly do concepts apply to the manifold? Or I guess he's not saying that the concepts apply to the manifold directly though, because concepts don't apply to the manifold as such, but rather to the manifold as united in apperception.
Yes,
Okay, but does that solve the issue?
I think so.
Um,
At least in
well, then
terms.
the question then becomes, how does the manifold, how does apperception? Yeah, I can see immediately. I don't know how to put it logically, but I can immediately see how apperception um, applies to the manifold. Namely, in that the manifold in being given has to be given to me in my experience. Did what I guess what I'm saying sounded absolutely schizo. Um,
Um, Not
okay, so
schizo, but I'm a little like lost.
so right. So the question, the goalpost kept moving in my head, right?
Okay.
So goalpost one is how do concepts apply to objects, right?
Mm-hmm.
Concepts exist in the
Well,
subjective
concepts don't
understanding.
apply to objects. Oh, or is that the answer? There is that.
Categories apply to objects. Categories or concepts apply to objects, according to Kant.
Okay. Yes.
Right. So how do concepts or categories apply to objects? Well, his answer is right here. An
Mm-hmm.
object is that in which that in the concept of which the manifold of a given intuition is united. Okay, that solves that problem. But then how do concepts apply to the manifold was the next question that came to me, because it seems like we just shifted the problem away from objects to the manifold. Well, the answer is concepts don't apply directly. Rather, the synthetic unity of of apperception applies to the manifold.
Yes.
Following so far?
Yes.
Okay.
And I would agree with
But
you.
then the problem to me becomes, how does the synthetic unity of apperception apply to the manifold?
I think
And
that's just I think that's just kind of like a given thing. I don't know.
exactly, that's what I was saying. I can't think of how that logically works, and yet if I attend to my faculties, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
If I just think about it for
Kant
a
wins
second,
again.
like obviously when like there's red and blue and it's together in an experience, I already have synthetically united it by my apperception, and there's like I can't, regardless of whether I can justify it, I can't even have the intuition without already doing that. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
just,
kind of a given, I think.
but that's weird, right? Because the understanding is supposed to be pure spontaneity. So
Yeah.
maybe this is where Fichte comes in.
I was gonna say,
Or
the post-Kantians have issues with. So this is what's known as the myth of the given. Lots of even not just like immediate post-Kantians, but people Kant scholars today are still like scrutinizing Kant over this idea that like that the kind of picture we're given in the transcendental aesthetic, where it's this kind of like 50-50, like half intuition, half understanding. This gets really murky once we start getting into the details of
yeah,
how apperception works, because
because the problem
apperception seems to be the ultimate, like the
like
understanding seems to be the ultimate thing.
condition
And
of
you're right.
even pure intuition. Even space and
Exactly.
time couldn't exist.
Exactly.
It seems like they couldn't exist without already having been my space and time.
Exactly, which is why Fichte goes on and he's like, okay, yes, the supreme I, the supreme, right? This is where this is even a Fichtean title, I guess, like retroactively. This is supreme principle of all the yeah, the synthetic unity of
Right.
perception is the
But
supreme
people
principle.
call this analogy where there's a supreme principle for of aesthetic and a supreme principle of logic,
When in
and
reality, they're not so separate.
Fichte, Hegel, etc., would say, well, no, the supreme principle of logic comes first, basically.
Yes, and Fichte wants to make it subjective. Hegel wants to make it more just like he kind of wants to get away with that division, which is
I see. Wow.
yeah.
That well. So this has been very fruitful and
Yes,
enlightening.
yes.
Right here.
As soon as I saw like this talk of object and objectivity, I was like, woohoo!
Okay.
This is the like when I was telling you months ago, I was excited for the logic. This is the kind of shit I was getting hyped for. So
Right. Well,
I have
I
a huge
have
Kant boner right
no
now. I
real
am excited.
no. I have no real further comments here about this paragraph, because the rest of it, outside of this little offhand comment about the definition of an object, which he introduces out of nowhere, which already solves the whole problem all at once.
Yeah, based.
um, it's so odd.
And this is why I was no, and this is why, cause, and you were also. I remember like months ago as well. I can't remember if this was on the recording or not, but now it will be because I'm retelling it. You were saying like, oh, isn't it kind of weird how like we can't really come up with like that great examples of synthetic a priori like cognition, and I'm like, it's the apperception, dude, and you're like, oh, it's kind of weird. The apperception is the only one, but now hopefully you like see now what I mean when it's like so foundational and so like, and when I was like in Shattering of Reason and like this realization hit, kind of like you said, the goalposts were moving, and then like I kind of got to the fundamental one and I was like, holy shit, yeah, this was
Right.
which is funny because I don't think we ever actually read this paragraph, but Dr. Lee kind of like gave his own version of this paragraph, and I was like, holy shit, perception is fucking mega based.
But it's so funny. He like takes forever to like remind you of all the steps, and then the actual meaty thing it just
This
takes
is a
one
little
second.
paragraph, yeah.
Well, it's not even the paragraph. It's just that one sentence.
Oh yes. I mean, I guess this, yeah. If you wanted to get even more like precise with it, I guess. Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's what I have to say.
Huge Kant sentence, huge Kant paragraph. Very glad we did that, and I think I read that, so I think you're also up next.
Okay. The first pure cognition of the understanding, therefore, on which the whole rest of its use is grounded, and that is at the same time also entirely independent from all conditions of sensible intuition,
What?
is the principle of, yeah, that's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Compared to what?
Is the
Well, like coming out of the aesthetic? No. Coming out of this paragraph in that sentence? Yes.
right
Yes. Anyway.
is the principle of the original synthetic unity of apperception. Thus, the mere form of outer sensible intuition space is not yet cognition at all. It only gives the manifold of intuition a priori for possible cognition. But in order to cognize something in space, e.g., a line, I must draw it, and thus synthetically bring about a determinate combination of the given manifold, so that the unity of this action is at the same time the unity of consciousness in the concept of a line, and is thereby an object, a determinate space first cognized. I'm going to pause right here. One
Yeah.
thing, just a very small side note, we've usually been giving like examples of the manifold with something in it, namely
Mm.
colors.
Yeah.
And I go to colors first because to me colors
That's
are
the most
more
immediate.
immediate than
Yeah.
shape. Yeah, like people talk about seeing shapes, but you don't see a shape.
Shape
You see
without
a
color.
combination of colors. Yeah, it's impossible to see the shape without color, right? And so visual is the main medium, which means that the most immediate sensible thing for human beings that we commonly encounter is basically color.
Yo, sense
Um,
certainty moment. I mean, not that Hegel specifically mentions color, but he kind of just mentions like indeterminate being object,
right.
which is color.
Now, of course, the word color has to refer to some category of manifold, you know, sensations. If I use red, that's a whole category of different rednesses that I have somehow grouped together, and that's vague. But the closest I can get to explaining like a direct empirical intuition is a color for the most part. Um, but obviously, as we can see here, maybe not obviously, but to clarify here, a manifold does not necessarily need to contain empirical intuitions. It could be just the manifold of pure intuition,
Which
right?
is
In this
where
case, he's
line comes
giving
in.
right. In this case, he's just giving space as a manifold. Now, unlike Kant, for some reason, he's got this superpower to imagine pure space without anything in it.
No
I cannot do
color or shape or any
that.
these basic.
I cannot do that.
No, me neither. Me neither. At
But
first, I thought I could, and then I tended to my faculties even closer and found out that I, like Patrick, am unable to do this
I
cognition.
am
So
clearly, yep, nope. I can imagine the color
I am
black.
cognitively
That's as
deficient by
close as I can
Kantian
get.
standards.
Yeah, that's as close as I can get. I can imagine the color black, and even then, I can't really imagine it as a space per se
It's kind of just like
without all the
an
imagery.
infinite blackness.
Right, it's an infinite, but not infinite in the same way that space proper should be.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, to return to the to return to the subject. Regardless, when we talk about the manifold, we can be talking about simply the pure manifold of space or of time or of space and time together, right?
Hmm.
And it doesn't have to be empirical intuitions. We've just been using that as a easier example. He's using, in my opinion, a somewhat harder example, but at the same time a more pure example, right?
Hmm.
A more basic fundamental example. So I just wanted to point that out in case someone got confused because, right, he's talking about the manifold in
Yeah.
a
Why
different
is a
way than
line here?
about it.
That is
Well,
why the
in
line
case
is there.
someone got confused about the fact that just space is also a manifold,
Oh,
right?
yes, because they
Because
also
we've
would
been
probably
using
run into that problem where they're
right
like, I
because
can't
we've
actually
just
do.
been using manifold as empirical intuitions. We've been giving only that example because it's like an easier example to talk about.
Hmm.
But he's giving just indeterminate space as the manifold, which is, of course, the supreme manifold for outer, you know,
Right, which is what he
outer.
says right here. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, now I'm going to return to reading.
Hmm.
The synthetic unity of consciousness is therefore an objective condition of all cognition, but not merely something I myself need in order to cognize an object, but rather something which under which every intuition must stand in order to become an object for me. Hmm. Since in every other way, and without the synthesis, the manifold would not be united in one consciousness. Yeah, I'm pretty sure pretty much everything else there is, follows from what has been said,
Yeah, what
and
we were talking about last
isn't even
time.
not even a corollary.
It's
Just
just
pretty obvious.
yes.
All right.
Cool. I will continue then. This last proposition is, as we said, it's self-analytic, although to be sure, it makes synthetic unity into the condition of all thinking. For it for it says nothing more than that all my representations in any given intuition must stand under the condition under which alone I can ascribe them to the identical self as my representations, and thus can grasp them together, as synthetically combined in apperception through the general expression I think.
This is either the third or the fourth time he's pointed out that even though he's expressing it analytically, it had to be synthetic first.
Yep, I was gonna say this. I read that kind of quickly, but I just wanted to because it seemed
That's
not.
because we've said it
Yeah,
many times.
but I just okay. I'm glad to not
All
be
right,
the only
I'm
one
going to
that.
keep going.
Yes.
This principle, however, is not a principle for every possible understanding, but only for one through whose pure apperception in the representation I am, nothing manifold is given at all. Well,
Oh.
that's pretty evident. I mean, that asserts that Fichte is not a Kantian, right?
Um.
Because if we assert that
Oh.
the
Oh.
supreme
Yes. 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 Yes.
because
Because
if the supreme principle is just that I am, the
yes.
apperception,
Yes.
then
Fichte would
nothing.
say it is the principle for every possible understanding. But Kant saying it is
Right.
not.
No, 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 not that.
Oh.
But only for one whose pure apperception in the representation I am, nothing manifold is given at all. Of course, for Fichte, right,
That is
if there
given.
is to be a
Well.
manifold, yes, it has to be given by the representation I am. No? Because
Well,
everything
well,
is
well,
given
well.
by
Yes, but
everything is
yet,
ultimately derived by
yes, but
like
also no, because exactly, it's derived. It's not given. It's more like spontaneity derived rather than like given. Like there kind of is no
oh,
given
well
in Fichte.
that just okay, so then he just doesn't have a manifold at all.
Uh,
Because a
not
manifold by definition
right.
has to be given.
Exactly. Yes, he doesn't have a Kantian manifold. He has a self-derived environment, metaphysical environment. I guess is how you could say it.
I don't know. I think that might be more questionable than what Kant already said. Personally, I'm
Like
gonna
my explanation or like Fichte's actual claim.
no Fichte's
Oh yeah.
statement. Like that seems even less intuitive than the idea that
Oh yes, it's not intuitive at all, which is why Fichte actually says you need to. Fichte is the ultimate. You need to tend to your faculties because he's like, if this isn't people who live off intuition. In the introduction to the Wissenschaftler, which you read in Shattering Reason, he's like, if you just live by intuition, like if you do philosophy by intuition, you are a dogmatist. So you need to become an
well, it's
idealist
not
and
intuition.
a, hmm?
It's not intuition.
No, I don't mean Kantian intuition. Because you were like that's not intuitive. Well,
Ah,
Fichte would say, oh well, if you just base if
well, I
philosophical
don't do
truth off that.
philosophy by intuition.
No, I
I
know.
just
I'm just kind of
That's
taking a
just
dig.
an initial remark.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just an initial
yeah.
remark. I agree that it's ridiculous to base your philosophy on intuition
Yes.
in the like conventional sense. Um, unless it's the Spinozist kind of intuition wherein it's possible to create a like you just know it, but you can justify it. The knowledge entails your ability to justify it logically, even though it does not derive from that ability.
Um,
I guess you haven't read the
Fichte.
ethics or the whole ethics.
I'm familiar with that like concept.
It's the last paragraph.
Oh
It's the
yeah.
the idea. It's the idea basically that you have humans can access a non-discursive understanding where they apprehend the whole at once in an intuitive act,
Hmm.
but then it's always possible to justify that. Um, if that's genuine, it's always possible to justify that discursively.
Right.
So
So it's not entirely just purely like
yeah,
apprehensive.
so it's not like attend to your faculties. It's like I can I figured I grasped this and therefore I can write the ethics and demonstrate it.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't grasp it through the demonstration.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that I know, like that's coherent to me. The reason I'm
Anyway,
going,
that's a hell of a
the reason I'm going is because I don't know how Fichte would feel about that. That's what I'm trying to think of, like a Fichtean response, whether he would agree or disagree. But this is all like you said, a tangent, and I will
very, very
continue to think
tangential.
about that, and I would probably need to
Um,
read more Fichte to know how to respond to that. So let's just move on, I guess.
yeah. I
Um,
do feel like there was one other thing I was trying to say here, but maybe it'll come to me. Um, that understanding through whose self-consciousness the manifold of intuition would at the same time be given, uh, an understanding through whose representation the objects of this representation would at the same time exist, that sounds like Fichte,
mm,
would require a special act of the synthesis of the manifold for the unity of consciousness, which the human understanding, which merely thinks but does not intuit, does require. He's talking about essentially about a divine mind here.
yeah, you could call it that.
I think that's definitely what he's envisioning, even if he's not formally.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, because as we mentioned, Kant does have a implicit system,
Mm-hmm.
like an implicit metaphysical belief system. Um, some of which he argues, well, some he has an explicit metaphysical belief system, which is again grounded in belief, not knowledge. But he also has some implicit assumptions that are just he doesn't mention.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
okay, yeah, they're like the God thing, and yeah, okay,
yeah.
which is
Um,
coming out here, so yeah.
well, one thing is that he implicitly seems to assume that in some sense God is the noumenon.
Mm-hmm.
But
Which is
returning,
very Zizekian, but anyway, I'm not going to get there right now.
returning. But for the human understanding, it is unavoidably the first principle, so that the human understanding cannot even form for itself the least concept of another possible understanding. Right, because he calls them ideas, not concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Either one that would intuit itself, or one that, while possessing sensible intuition, would possess one of a different kind than one grounded in space and time. Now, this seems to be a contradiction, but it seems it's really more of him using terms weirdly. He says, right, this is what this is what an understanding that would be an alternative to ours would be.
Yeah.
By the way, we can't form the least concept of such an understanding. Right,
He
that
does.
seems to be a bit of a contradiction, but I don't think it is because of the way he's using concept.
Do you want to just elaborate on that?
Well, because concept, um, strictly speaking, is something that we understand in itself
Mm-hmm.
because it is part of the subjective conditions of our understanding.
Right, so that can vary based on the subject.
So that is not to say that it's anything we grasp in like any way
Mm-hmm.
through thinking. Not everything that we grasp in any way through thinking is a concept, but only those subjective conditions which we can thoroughly understand
Mm-hmm.
is what I would the way I would interpret what he's saying.
Yes.
Right, because he does talk later when we get into the transcendental dialectic about the ideas of reason,
I was gonna say
which are
yes.
different
This is the beginning of like a very Kantian pattern that he repeats
right,
of talking about things that we don't understand, but we can understand that we don't understand them.
right. And so he says, like, look, this is what this is what a different kind of apperception would be like. By the way, we can't have the least concept of it.
Mm,
Sounds a little weird. I think he's talking about having an idea of it rather than a concept.
yes.
So it's an idea of pure reason that he
Mm.
has rather than a concept. I know it's been a while since we talked about the idea of like talk about pure reason in this critique of pure reason,
Yo, that's crazy.
but pure reason is not the understanding.
Nope, it is not.
So yeah,
We'll get more into that when we do. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, as they say. Cool. Yeah. Well, that's the end of that section. Are there any other comments?
not from me.
I don't think from me either. Everything was yeah. Oh, it looks like we're gonna get more looking slightly further ahead for next recording. next session what objective unity self-consciousness is. Seems like we're going to get more of that good object stuff, which was so frothing over before. So, yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully you are too. Thank you for joining
Woo.
us, and we'll see you when we get here. Yippee!
Until next time, keep objectifying.